Hi, my name is Chum. Today I present my homework mini story, The Day of the Dead.
I arrived in Guatemala on the Day of the Dead, November 1st.
I arrived in Guatemala on
Did
the Day of the
I
Dead,
arrive
November 1st.
in Guatemala?
Yes.
Yes. I arrived
AJ,
in Guatemala.
AJ arrived in Guatemala on the Day
Where
of the Dead.
did I arrive?
Guatemala.
Guatemala.
I arrived in
I
Guatemala
arrived
on the Day of the
in
Dead.
Guatemala. I arrived in Guatemala on the Day of the Dead, November 1st. Who arrived in Guatemala
Who arrived
on
in
the Day of the
Guatemala
Dead?
on the Day of the Dead? AJ.
Well, me, AJ. Right?
Me.
I arrived in
I
Guatemala
arrived in Guatemala
on the Day of the Dead, November 1st.
November 1st.
Did I arrive in Guatemala on November 3rd?
Arrived in Guatemala on November 3rd?
No, I didn't arrive in
November
Guatemala
1st.
on
I
November
arrived in
3rd.
Guatemala on the
I
Day of
arrived
the
in
Dead,
Guatemala
November
on
1st.
November 1st. What day did I arrive
What day did
in
I
Guatemala?
arrive? The Day of the Dead, November 1st.
I arrived in Guatemala on November 1st. Where did I arrive
Where did I
on November
arrive?
1st?
On November 1st. Guatemala.
Guatemala, right?
Guatemala.
I arrived in Guatemala on November 1st. I arrived in Guatemala on the Day of the Dead, November 1st. Was the atmosphere like a party?
Atmosphere like a party. Yes.
In
The atmosphere is like a party.
The cemetery. The atmosphere was like a party in the cemetery.
In the cemetery.
Was the atmosphere
What is the atmosphere?
like a party
Like a party.
at my house?
At my house?
No, not at my house.
In
The atmosphere was like a party
in the cemetery.
in the cemetery. The atmosphere was not like a party in my house. So the atmosphere was like a party.
So the atmosphere
There
was
were
party.
people everywhere.
There were people everywhere.
Families were sitting around the
Families
graves
were sitting around
of their
left
dead
to the grave.
ancestors.
Of the dead ancestor.
Where were the families sitting?
Where were the families sitting? Left to
Around
the
the
grave.
graves.
Around on the grave.
They were sitting around the graves.
They were sitting around on the grave.
Who was sitting
Who was sitting
around the graves?
around the grave? Families. Families
The families.
was
The
sitting
families were sitting around the
on
graves.
the grave.
Were they sitting around the trees?
Were they sitting around the tree?
No, they weren't
They were
sitting
sitting
around
around
the
the
trees.
grave. On the
They were sitting
on the
around
grave.
the graves. So, where were they sitting?
Where were they sitting?
Around
Around
the
on
graves.
the grave.
Families were sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors. Were they sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors?
Yes. Family
Yes. They were sitting around the graves
on the
of
grave.
their dead ancestors. Were they sitting around the graves of their friends?
No. Were they sitting around?
No, not really. They were sitting around the graves
on the grave
of their dead,
of the dead
ancestors.
Ancestor.
Who was sitting around the graves?
Who was sitting around the grave? Families. Family was sitting
Families
around
were
the
sitting
grave.
around the graves. Whose graves were they sitting around?
Who grave? Who they
Whose graves were they sitting
around? Ancestor.
Yes, their dead ancestors.
Their dead ancestors.
Their ancestors. Their ancestors' graves.
The ancestor.
They were sitting around
They were sitting
the
around
graves
the
of
grave
their dead
of the dead.
ancestors' graves. Do we ever have parties next to graves? No, never. We
No,
never
never.
have parties
We
next to
never have
graves.
party next to the grave.
Where do we never have parties?
Where do we have
Next to graves.
next to the grave?
We never have parties next to graves. Do we
Bye.
ever?
Thank you.